Hi, in this video we're talking about word choice so that you can unpack the writer's choice of words in the readings for this week. And a lot of this is kind of obvious and intuitive, but I think it helps to have a list of things to look for as you're analyzing the diction or the word choice. So you have something to unpack. You might be confronted with an essay that seems really simple, but you want to have specific things that you're looking for. So think about pronouns. What pronouns is the writer using? First person, I, me, second person, you, third person, they. Academic essays tend to use third person. They tend not to use first person, although there are some examples, plenty of examples of academic essays that will use first person when the writer is talking about their research strategies. Connotation, think about the feeling, the collective feeling that we as a culture tend to have about a certain word. Of course, we also have our own individual sense of a word, but generally we have maybe positive or negative connotations or connotations that extend beyond just being pluses and minuses. So associations or feelings that surround a word. For example, in my view, slender and skinny have very different connotations. Slender to me has a more positive, more elegant connotation. Skinny does not. But if you ask someone who's just seen the movie Slender Man, right, they might tell you something a little bit different. So think about the dictionary definition of the word, that's denotation, but also, of course, you want to look for connotation. Academic language versus conversational language, or in some of the pieces that we read, there's both. There's both academic and conversational language. So this language tends to be detached. It tends not to draw attention to itself, academic language that is. It tends to use conventional or standard English and often uses abstract or technical terms. Sometimes there's even so many abstract terms or so many jargon terms that we're kind of confused if we're not in that particular field. And some academic essays will use figurative language. Usually this is the writer unpacking someone else's figurative language, especially if you're reading something for an English class, something that's literary criticism, but the essay itself might use figurative language. Conversational essays tend to use colloquialisms or slang. We all use slang. For example, I say awesome a lot, even when something is not awe-inspiring at all. It's just average. And that reveals something about where I'm from or maybe how old I am, right? So slang can actually be really revealing and really rich. Good writers make use of slang to make the writing seem much more vivid and to capture a specific time and place. You're probably not going to see it as much, though, in academic writing. Euphemisms. So euphemisms are words that kind of sugarcoat or cover up something that we might not be very comfortable talking about. We all use euphemisms all the time. And of course, academic language sometimes uses way too many euphemisms too. So it's not limited to conversational language. But these are words that cover something up. So saying with child rather than pregnant. There's a time and a place for using euphemisms, of course, right? If we want to soften our tone a little bit or not be so direct. But a lot of people, including George Orwell in Politics in the English Language, argue that we use euphemisms too much. Jargon. So like I said, these are words that are specific to an industry that not everyone outside of the industry, a layperson, wouldn't necessarily understand, right? If you work in law enforcement, there are all sorts of codes or expressions that I wouldn't understand. If you work in some sort of STEM field, I might not understand the words you're using. If you work in heating and air conditioning and you say HVAC or HVAC, I might not know what that is. There's all sorts of examples of jargon. Every field uses some sort of jargon. If you work in a restaurant and someone says a four top, if you worked in a restaurant before, you know what that means. If you haven't, you have no idea what that means. And then conversational pieces tend to use first person, but not necessarily, not always. Let's move on to noticing figurative language. There's an extensive list of figures of speech earlier in the module. So if you look in the module for, I think, the first week of the semester when I talk about reading and what to annotate for and how to close read, there's a much more extensive list. I just want to talk here about why writers might use figurative language, even if they're not writing fiction or a poem, even if they're just writing prose, they're writing an article or an op-ed. And I also want to talk about the obvious examples of metaphor and simile. So in my view, good writers make use of figurative language, not to sound fancy, not to sound pretentious, not to check something off a list, I hope, I think when writers do this, they're trying to dramatize an idea. It makes the argument more memorable when the language is heightened, or when there's something about this sentence that stands out from all the other sentences. And oftentimes when it's difficult to explain something in literal terms, we have to resort to metaphor, right? Even if we're not writers, we do this all the time in conversation. So a metaphor is a figure of speech that makes a comparison of two unlike things. And the things that you're comparing really have to be things that are kind of unexpected. If you compare a Mac and a PC, that's just a comparison, right? That's not a metaphor. If I say a Mac is a PC, first off, that doesn't even make sense. That's not a metaphor. But if you write something like love is the North Star, well, those two things are quite dissimilar. They're quite different, right? Love is a feeling or an emotion or an attitude, or even a verb to some people. The North Star, that is a star, right? That guides people. But you can see how maybe they're alike in some sort of interesting, unexpected way. They're both beacons. They both guide people in dark times, whatever it is. A simile is a type of metaphor. So metaphor is the umbrella term. A simile is a type of metaphor. These are also unexpected comparisons using like or as. So similes tend to really show comparisons between two things. And hopefully the simile is not something incredibly cliche that we've heard a million times. Then we might say, yeah, it's a simile, but it's a cliche simile. Hopefully it's using fresh, original language. And I tend to think that the best metaphors and similes compare something kind of sensory and visceral, something that we can actually imagine in our brains, with something a little bit more abstract, but that's just my opinion. I hope this helps you to unpack the word choice in this week's readings. Bye.